You are now looking live at Buckingham Palace, the home of not yet, not yet, they're not, very soon. Kings and queens for centuries. But later this morning, it is King Charles III who is preparing to be. The words were barely a page long, but by the time King Charles placed his signature beneath them, one of the most sensitive titles in the modern monarchy had been ripped away. Camilla had entered the day as Queen Consort. She would leave it facing a succession order that removed that designation from future royal instruments. No ceremony, no warning speech. Just Charles, a pen, and a decision that stunned the palace into silence. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles entered the small Buckingham Palace briefing room where two senior constitutional advisors waited. He read the order twice, removed his glasses, and asked for the final page. A succession order, in plain terms, is a formal direction shaping royal roles, titles, and continuity around a future transfer of the crown. The king requested no amendment. He signed. He stripped Camilla of the designation Queen Consort in future succession and continuity documents, ending any automatic constitutional identity beside the crown after the next reign began. The wording mattered because Camilla had spent years moving from controversy toward acceptance. The title was more than ceremony. It was proof that public rejection had not defined her final place. Now Charles had removed the language, carrying that hard-won legitimacy forward entirely. He did not rise after signing. The monarch set the pen down, pressed his fingers against the table, and said quietly that he had delayed this longer than he should have. One advisor preserved the remark in a documented internal account, revealing the king's exhaustion. Camilla received the order privately at Clarence House. She read the first paragraph standing, then slowly sat before reaching the final line. Her shock turned to humiliation when she understood that Charles had acted without giving her one last appeal. Then came the second blow. A sealed attachment dealt with future language for royal spouses after succession, and William's name appeared on the confidential circulation list. The prince was included. Camilla stared at that detail longer than the rest. Meanwhile, Charles ordered the signed papers distributed before lunch, blocking any quiet reversal. An advisor hesitated at the door. The king looked up and said, "It stands." Camilla's first question was not why her husband had removed the title. She asked who had persuaded him to act now. When William's name was mentioned, her expression changed completely, because beneath the shock of Charles's signature was a far more painful truth. This was not only a decision about Camilla's title, it was the collision of three people who believed they were protecting the crown from one another. To the public, they stood beneath the same royal standard. Behind closed doors, Charles, Camilla, and William had reached the same dangerous question from three completely different directions. One saw duty as sacrifice, one saw recognition as survival, and one saw the future of the monarchy approaching faster than anyone dared admit. The succession order did not create their conflict. It merely forced three private fears into the same room at the worst possible moment. Charles had become consumed by continuity. In a private conversation preserved in an aide's documented account, the king admitted that every decision now seemed connected to what would happen after him. Continuity meant the transfer of royal duties, titles, and authority from one reign to the next, and he feared William would inherit unresolved family wounds alongside the crown. Camilla carried a different fear. The Queen Consort title, the formal designation for the monarch's wife, without making her the reigning sovereign, had become proof that decades of scrutiny had not decided her final place in history. Losing it felt like acceptance had been granted, then quietly withdrawn. She sat alone with her sister after receiving the order, folding and unfolding the accompanying note until the paper softened at the edges. Camilla did not cry. She only whispered that Charles knew exactly what the title meant to her. William, meanwhile, waited outside his father's private study and measured every word before entering. The prince understood that questioning Camilla's future position also touched the king's loyalties. He wanted clarity for the crown, yet guilt followed him because any change could look like personal punishment. Music. When William finally sat opposite Charles, he asked whether the decision had been constitutional or personal. The monarch avoided the distinction. Instead, he opened a drawer and removed an earlier unsigned draft. The document proved something startling. The future king had requested a formal review of succession language, but he had never asked for Camilla's title to be stripped. Charles had gone further on his own. The king turned the draft toward his son, but kept one hand resting on it. His sadness was unmistakable. He told William that loving someone did not mean every arrangement surrounding them had to survive forever. Then the prince noticed the date typed at the top. It had been prepared immediately after one royal ceremony months earlier, a night when Charles and Camilla had argued in private, music. And no one outside a tiny circle knew why. And once William recognized that date, the order stopped looking sudden because the real beginning of Camilla's fall could be traced to one precise evening when a ceremonial disagreement became a private point of no return. Months before the succession order shocked Britain, a royal reception ended with two doors closing and a marriage changing behind them. The guests never knew. The cameras captured smiles, yet inside a small withdrawing room, Charles and Camilla argued over a future neither of them could discuss without touching old wounds. One sentence crossed the room that night. Charles never forgot it, and by morning, the first draft removing her future designation had quietly been requested. The trouble began at the Windsor Continuity Reception, a closed ceremonial gathering held after senior royals reviewed future accession protocols and the public roles expected during William's eventual reign. Session protocols are the plans and rules used when one monarch is succeeded by another, setting out how authority and royal duties move forward. Camilla read preliminary papers that reduced the formal role of a surviving royal spouse once a new sovereign took the throne. She immediately understood what that could mean. When William became king, the queen consort feared she could be pushed quietly to the edge. After the guests left, Camilla confronted Charles alone in a withdrawing room at Windsor Castle. She placed the protocol booklet on the table and demanded a guarantee that her title and precedence would remain protected. Precedence simply means a royal person's formal rank and place in official order. Charles, already exhausted, refused to bind William's future court with promises the prince had never approved. Camilla's restraint broke. She accused the king of accepting years of devotion while leaving her final status exposed. Her voice cracked as she asked whether decades beside him had earned her nothing permanent. Charles stood. The accusation had wounded him deeply. He told her the crown could not become compensation for suffering endured in private life. Camilla stared at him, stunned that her husband had separated their marriage from her royal position so sharply. Then she delivered the sentence he would later preserve in handwritten notes from the conversation. Then make certain your son understands I was crowned into this family, not borrowed by it. Charles went completely still. Her demand for permanence frightened him because he believed succession authority had to remain with the next sovereign. Before breakfast the following morning, the monarch summoned a constitutional secretary and requested a confidential review of spousal designation beyond the present reign. That review became the unsigned draft William later discovered. Back in the present, Charles reread his own notes and closed the file slowly, saddened by the truth. The order had been born from the worst argument of his marriage. Camilla remembered Windsor too, and she believed Charles had weaponized that pain. So when Camilla crossed the palace corridor toward Charles's study, she was no longer asking to save a title. She was demanding to know whether her husband had turned one night of anger into the document that erased her place. There were no advisors between them, no courtiers, no constitutional language to hide behind. Camilla entered Charles's study carrying the signed order in one hand and closed the door herself. The king remained beside his desk. His wife did not sit. For several seconds neither spoke. Then she placed the document in front of him and asked the question Charles had spent months avoiding. Was Windsor the night you decided I could be removed? Charles asked her to sit. She refused. Camilla wanted no formal audience, meaning an official royal meeting shaped by protocol and rank. She wanted an answer from her husband. The king finally admitted that Windsor had begun the review, but he insisted the final order was about succession boundaries, not revenge. Those boundaries were the limits separating one reign's decisions from the next sovereign's authority. Charles told her he could not create permanent expectations that William might later be forced to destroy. Camilla's restraint broke. She said the queen consort title had meant more than status because she had spent years being treated as temporary, unwanted, and unforgiven. The designation had told her the past had finally stopped chasing her. Now Charles had taken away the one symbol that made acceptance feel real. The monarch lost his composure. He told her he had fought for their life together, but he could not rewrite the crown to soothe every scar left by that fight. Camilla froze. Those words wounded her more deeply than the order itself. She pulled a chair sharply away from the desk, but still refused to sit. Then she asked whether William wanted her gone. No, Charles answered immediately. His speed surprised her. The king admitted the truth in their recorded private conversation. The prince had asked for clarity, but Charles alone chose to remove the queen consort designation from future succession instruments. The harsher wording belonged to him. Camilla stared at her husband and asked whether more changes were coming. Charles said nothing. His silence was enough. She understood that other continuity decisions, meaning plans governing royal roles across future reigns, were still under review. At last, Camilla sat. Her anger gave way to sadness. She looked away and asked why he could sign the order, but could not warn her over breakfast. The monarch had no answer that sounded kind. Before leaving, she told Charles that documents did not enforce themselves. Someone inside the monarchy had enough power to make his decision irreversible, and she intended to find that person. Camilla left believing she had confronted the man behind the order, but the deeper power lay beyond Charles's study, inside the machinery of succession, where signatures mattered less than who controlled what happened after them. Royal power rarely announces itself by raising its voice. Sometimes it sits behind a closed file, checks a line of wording, and decides which version of history becomes official. While Charles and Camilla confronted each other as husband and wife, another battle was unfolding around the succession order itself. William entered that battle reluctantly. Yet, the moment he understood what his father had signed, the future king faced a choice: soften the decision or ensure nobody quietly reversed it. The order now had to enter continuity files, household guidance, ceremonial planning, and succession language. Continuity files are the confidential records used to prepare royal duties and authority for the next reign, while household guidance tells staff how those decisions must be applied. A signature created the order. Implementation gave it power. William met privately with the senior official coordinating those records and was shown two versions of the guidance. One preserved Camilla's old designation, the other carried Charles's new wording. The prince read both pages without speaking. He looked uncomfortable, not triumphant. William asked whether his father understood the emotional cost of immediate change. The official answered through a documented meeting account that the king had demanded circulation without delay. That reply troubled the future king. He feared Camilla would believe he had engineered her humiliation, and memories of old succession tensions made the risk feel personal. William did not want another family wound attached to his eventual reign. Then Charles entered unexpectedly. The monarch told his son not to carry responsibility for a decision he had made alone. William answered that responsibility would reach him anyway, because everyone would view the order through succession. Charles did not argue. Instead, he pointed to one instruction hidden beneath the new wording. The designation could not be restored by household preference or private agreement. Any reversal required a new sovereign-level decision, meaning only the reigning monarch could formally change it. William understood at once. His father had protected the order from emotional pressure. The prince asked whether Charles expected Camilla to challenge it. The king looked at him and said, "I expect pain to make all of us unreasonable." Then Charles took the old continuity page, folded it once, and placed it inside the confidential file instead of destroying it. William watched carefully. His father was grieving even as he enforced the change. By evening, the revised instructions reached Camilla's household, and one line immediately altered a planned royal engagement. The title had already disappeared on paper, but when Camilla saw her name altered on the next day's royal briefing, the decision stopped being constitutional language and became a new reality she could physically feel. The first consequence arrived without trumpets or public declarations. It appeared on a cream briefing card placed beside Camilla's morning tea. She reached for it casually, expecting the familiar ceremonial wording she had seen countless times. Then her hand stopped. Her name remained. Her engagement remained. But the designation beneath it had changed. For several seconds, she simply stared. The order Charles signed the previous morning had finally entered her daily life, and suddenly it felt devastatingly real. Camilla read the revised household briefing for a scheduled charitable reception twice. A household briefing is the daily guidance showing how a royal engagement will be handled, including titles, timing, and formal introductions. The language no longer framed her role through the continuity wording preserved in earlier succession planning. Her private secretary explained that her current public styling had not disappeared from every setting, but future-facing designation and succession language now had to follow the king's order. Camilla turned the card face down. She asked everyone to leave except the secretary. When the door closed, the queen consort admitted she had expected anger. Instead, she felt as though the palace had begun practicing how to exist without her. That thought cut deeper because the title had once proved she was no longer temporary. Now every changed line seemed to reverse that hard-won acceptance. Camilla considered canceling the reception. Every bow, announcement, and introduction suddenly felt like a test of how diminished she had become. Her secretary warned that withdrawing would allow the order to define her immediately. Then Charles telephoned. She watched the call go unanswered. Minutes later, a handwritten message arrived, asking her to attend dinner privately. Camilla folded the note and placed it beneath the altered briefing card. Elsewhere, William learned through a documented household update that the revised language had already reached her schedule. The prince confronted his father and called the speed emotionally brutal. Charles insisted that delay would create false hope of reversal. William understood the logic, but he hated the human cost. Camilla finally chose to attend. Before leaving, she removed one ceremonial piece selected for the engagement and replaced it with something personally meaningful, less tied to formal queenship. The decision was quiet but clear. At the reception, Camilla heard her name announced. She paused for half a breath, then moved forward. A close aide noticed her expression tighten before she recovered. She would not collapse publicly. That evening, William asked to see her alone. No Charles, no secretaries, no succession files. And in that private meeting, Camilla would discover that William's real fear was not her title at all. It was what unresolved resentment might do to both of them when Charles was no longer there to stand between them. For years, Charles had been the invisible bridge between William and Camilla. Every difficult subject passed through him. Every old wound existed somewhere near his name. But that evening, the prince and the queen consort sat opposite each other with no aides, no monarch, and no constitutional advisor to translate their emotions into polite language. Camilla expected accusation. William expected anger. Instead, their first honest conversation began with an admission neither had planned to make. William entered the private sitting room and found her already waiting. She asked whether he had come to defend the succession order. The prince said no. He had come because silence had become more dangerous than honesty. Constitutional clarity, meaning clear rules about royal authority and roles during a future reign, had been his original concern. William feared inheriting vague arrangements that could force him to make a cruel decision immediately after his father's death. Camilla listened, then admitted something she had never said to him directly. She had spent much of her royal life wondering whether the future king saw her only as part of the pain connected to Diana. Losing the title revived her oldest fear, that she had never truly been accepted, only tolerated. William did not offer easy comfort. He said their history could never be made simple, but he would not pretend she had not stood beside Charles through difficult years. The honesty hurt Camilla, yet it also made her listen more carefully. Then the prince said it plainly. He had not asked the king to strip the queen consort designation. The statement was preserved in a documented account of their private conversation, leaving no doubt about his position. Camilla studied him before finally accepting that part of her anger had been aimed at the wrong person. William then revealed that Charles had ordered the first review after the Windsor continuity reception. Camilla went still. Her confrontation with the monarch had triggered the process long before the prince became involved. At last, she admitted why she had demanded permanence. She feared disappearing from royal history once Charles was gone. William answered that titles could not guarantee memory. Conduct, restraint, and final choices were what survived succession. Camilla reached into her handbag, removed the altered briefing card, and placed it between them. She looked at it once. Then she told William she would never ask him to reverse his father's order when he became king. The decision changed everything. When Charles learned, through William's private account, what Camilla had said, the king prepared a final, public clarification. The conflict changed in that room because Camilla stopped fighting William for a future title, and Charles, learning of her decision, finally understood how the monarchy could explain his order without destroying the woman beside him. By dawn, the secret was no longer confined to royal corridors. Britain woke to a headline so blunt that commuters stopped beside newspaper stands to read it twice. Palace phones lit up. Broadcasters abandoned prepared schedules. Outside Buckingham Palace, strangers gathered beneath gray skies arguing over a title most had never imagined could be removed by Charles himself. The private crisis had become a national spectacle, and one image captured the entire shock of the morning. A major newspaper carried the words, "Charles strips consort title," above a split image of the king and Camilla. At Victoria Station, a woman stopped beside the platform entrance holding the paper, while 3 commuters leaned closer to read it. Television broadcasters called the succession order the most dramatic internal redefinition of Camilla's royal position since her marriage. A succession order, in simple terms, is a formal royal direction shaping titles and authority around the future transfer of the crown. Palace correspondents focused on the timing and Charles's personal role. Crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace. Some defended the monarch for drawing a firm line around succession authority. Others called the decision cruel toward a woman who had spent years serving beside him. Inside the palace, Charles watched several minutes of coverage before muting the television. The king looked pained when commentators described the order as a marital rejection. According to a documented account from the aide beside him, he said the public was seeing consequence without seeing motive. Camilla, meanwhile, prepared for another engagement even after advisors offered her a private exit. She refused. The queen consort was not trying to challenge Charles. She simply would not allow humiliation to become her final public posture. Then the palace released a clarification personally approved by the king. It stated that the order concerned future constitutional continuity, meaning clear rules for royal authority across successive reigns, and did not erase Camilla's years of service or Charles's devotion to his wife. William appeared separately and, when questioned, gave one controlled sentence recorded by broadcasters. The monarchy must protect both human dignity and the clarity of succession. His words made one fact clear. The prince and Camilla were no longer fighting each other. At her engagement, a woman behind the barrier called out, "Keep going." Camilla paused, turned, and gave a small nod. Cameras captured it. In one moment, defeat became endurance. That night, Charles returned to the room where he had signed the order. This time, Camilla joined him. Britain had delivered its arguments, the palace had defended its reasoning, and William had chosen clarity. But the final verdict belonged to Charles and Camilla in the room where a title ended and the truth of their marriage remained. Charles returned to the signed order after the palace had gone quiet. The same pen remained in its case. The same chair stood beside the table. But the fury of the previous days had changed into something heavier. Consequence. Camilla entered without carrying the document. She no longer needed to. Both understood what had been removed. Now they had to decide whether a title stripped from royal succession would also strip trust from their marriage or finally force them to stop hiding behind the crown. Charles told her he had considered delaying implementation after watching the public reaction. The king knew implementation meant putting a royal decision into daily practice through official guidance and future planning. Yet, he believed delay would turn the order into a negotiation the monarchy could no longer afford. Camilla said she finally understood the succession principle, the rule that protects the next sovereign's authority from promises made by the previous reign. She still believed her husband had handled her cruelly. Accepting the decision did not erase the pain of his silence. Charles apologized, not for signing the order. He apologized for allowing her to discover it through formal paperwork when she first needed him to speak as her husband. Camilla finally cried. She admitted she had fought too fiercely for permanence because losing the designation seemed to prove every person who had once rejected her was right. Then Charles opened the file. He removed the old unsigned draft and placed it beside the final order. The monarch showed her the date. The decision had begun before William's involvement. Camilla read it slowly and said she would never again blame the prince for initiating her removal. She then revealed, through their private recorded conversation, that she had already told William she would not seek restoration of the title under his future reign. Charles was visibly moved. The queen consort had removed the very uncertainty he feared might poison the succession. The king took her hand and said the crown required a boundary, but their life together did not have to be measured by constitutional wording. Camilla answered that he should have told her that before signing. For the first time in days, Charles almost smiled. The order remained. Camilla's designation was stripped from the future succession framework. William inherited a clearer path. Charles accepted responsibility. She chose dignity over another battle, and that was the true verdict of Charles's shocking succession order. The crown moved forward with clearer boundaries. Camilla walked away without the title she fought to preserve, and the monarchy survived because, at the decisive moment, 3 wounded people finally chose duty, dignity, and peace over another generation of royal war. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.